Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, August 14th, 2020. We are semi-ready for a brand new show. I don't know. Somehow we fell a couple of seconds behind today, and you won't notice it, hopefully. Maybe you're all wrapped up in Netroots Nation and those happenings. So that's a possibility. We'll hope that distracted you this morning. I don't know. A couple of seconds left. Fell off the map on this morning's program, and you won't notice it, but I'll notice it when I start editing things to get things ready to put up on the podcast distribution system. But, it won't matter too much. I think we'll get plenty of content out of today's show, that's for sure. We got two folks lined up today. Ordinarily, for the election season, you would be looking at Ian Reifowitz this morning on a Friday. And, guess what? Same thing. So we're on schedule. It's exactly what you would expect to see. And yeah, this is our second appearance of a regular stretch of Fridays during the election season. We're thankful to have him along for this particular ride, and we're just trying to figure out in the background exactly what we'll be doing for the day, because as it turns out, our second time out of the box, there's no new piece waiting in the wings from Ian for weekend publication. That doesn't mean he doesn't have thoughts to express, and maybe this is an easier way of getting some of those out. Sometimes it's not, 8,000 words worth of work all ready to go in written form, edited, and ready for your reading pleasure. Sometimes it's inchoate thoughts that we put together, cobble together here on the radio, and that's what makes it fun. We'll be discussing all sorts of happenings. You may have noticed that there was a vice presidential candidate chosen the other day. And we've been speaking a little bit about that. And as a matter of fact, to supplement our coverage of that and of the issues swirling around that selection, even though they shouldn't be, Armando has got yet more thoughts. As it turns out, we gave him a taste of getting back on the radio. And guess what happened? He enjoyed it, but so did you. That's the important point. And so we'll bring him back in for a discussion in the second hour. Those of you who follow him on Twitter will already know what's, as they say colloquially, chapping his ass, as some people say this colloquially. I think he said burning his ass, so I think it's similar. That's usually the sensation that goes along with a chapped skin problem. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. But in addition to the domestic politics, the international politics joining back into the discussion today. And guess what? As it happens, it is an area of expertise for Ian, and so we'll speak to him about that. Yesterday, got word midday. I think I don't know. Well, we'll ask Ian. Ordinarily, you would think the announcement of a Middle East peace deal would have gotten more attention and garnered more plaudits for the president who forged it, except that, one, nobody thinks Donald Trump really had much to do with this one. Neither, I guess, I don't know whether they really think Jared Kushner, who was supposed to have everything to do with this one, really did much here either. But we'll find out what Ian's view of this thing is. It's not our usual area of expertise. And, of course, bringing Israel into any discussion is always a problematic issue for the show. But here we'll have an issue area expert to discuss it with. But on the other hand, it struck my first thought on the thing. I guess we could wait and discuss it with Ian, but we'll do that in just a minute. My first thought on the thing, though, and I'll repeat it later when we get to it, I guess, is, it's nice. It's a good thing. It's always a good thing to have normalized relations between Israel and any country that refused to this point, really, to have normalized relations with them. That's always a nice thing to smooth over. But, I don't know, maybe things have changed, but growing up as a kid, with one eye, perhaps, on the Israeli situation in the Middle East, never really struck me as a huge problem. The relationship between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Though they are both Middle Eastern countries, and though I suppose they both considered themselves to be estranged from one another, if not actually at war, that was just sort of the generalized standing of the Arab world for many years, and they don't share a border, and although that wasn't necessarily what drove the animosity between the Arab world and the Israelis all the time, the UAE just never really figured into things much, and I think they still don't. But it's nice to have the offer out there, and of course it's being used, or the offer was being used to leverage a cessation of annexation activities, at least in part of the West Bank, as I understand it, and that's always a good concession to get as well, because that at least, addresses the situation on the ground. As a matter of fact, we'll save the rest of the discussion and filling in the details for when we speak with Ian in just a few minutes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that jumped out at me for immediate discussion. There are probably a few things that we'll have to get around to in depth perhaps later on. Time to discuss in greater depth what's happening at the post office, I think. In pandemic news, there's an explosive story really in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the gist of which is that, neither the Trump administration nor Brian Kemp's administration in Georgia have handled things even close to properly, and thousands of people are going to see their health put at risk for that reason. Many of them will die, and it's all because we can't figure out they can't figure out what to do. They can't nail down a strategy, and now we're going to see a contest. Who's Trumpier, Trump himself or Brian Kemp emulating Trump? We'll have to unravel that one for you in just a minute. But for now, let's see. We'll launch our day's show finally at last here, and repeating Bill's admonition to those of you listening from all the way up in Portland, Maine. Daily Coast Radio is live now, and Justice tells me I think I may have forgotten to cue the morning post for the front page, so I probably screwed everybody up over there. But we are here. We are live. And today, me, David Waldman, that's the guy running the show right now. Kagro X welcomes Ian Reifowitz to the show, and maybe even a bonus mystery guest who may or may not go by the anagram Roadman. Oh, is that right? Okay, I have officially intrigued you, he says, and now you can sit down and figure out the anagram. All right. I think you can all figure it out because I already told you. I didn't realize I was supposed to be acting like it was a mystery guest. Okay, let's cue up the Skype here and give Ian a call, and we'll get it off of the Skype call testing service instead. Although, as pleasant as they are, I think we'd much rather connect with Ian. So let's see if he's ready and waiting and ready to go after our pleasant chimes introduce him. All right, good morning, Ian. How you doing?
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm at peace with the United Arab Emirates, I guess.
Excellent.
Officially. Yes, I noticed that you threw that out as a topic, and I've been kind of thinking we definitely wanted to at least touch on it. It's not usually an area that we explore in depth, mostly because we're either not sure entirely what we're talking about when we get out of our usual topics, but also because it tends to be a touchy subject, and I don't mind touching it once in a while, so long as I have somebody around who knows what they're doing. So
happy to be that person.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was an issue area you taught about.
Yeah, I do teach a course on the Israeli-Palestinian Arab conflict / history / relations, 20th century up to the present. So it's always an interesting course to have with students. Sometimes I have students who think that the material I'm presenting to them is too pro-Israeli, and other times I think other students will say that it's too pro-Palestinian. So I figure, that I'm probably on the right track.
Oh, well, okay, that's a good formula. Very often, sometimes it's an awful formula for other things. I must admit, we do hear about that in journalism. But yeah, in teaching in New York, you'll get that. So you've navigated the waters as well as become an issue area expert. So perfect for teeing this up. Yeah, that was kind of well, I don't know. Would you say it was a surprise, the announcement? I mean, no one was anticipating it, but.
Well, it was, okay. No, it wasn't a big surprise. Once Bibi Netanyahu started talking about annexation, if you were really sort of following in the weeds, right, he started talking about or threatening to formally annex parts of the West Bank. Yeah. And that this obviously would be, I would argue a disastrous move. It would have been a unilateral move to bypass negotiations, and perhaps it might have even completely undermined the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, the Fatah. To take a step back, right, to put on my professor hat a little bit, within the Palestinian community, you basically have two organizations, Fatah and Hamas. Fatah is the much more mainstream organization. They're the ones who essentially are in charge of the West Bank in terms of the Palestinian Authority, which is the officially recognized government.
Okay,
that's the faction that was founded by Yasser Arafat, and when Arafat joined into the peace process with Yitzhak Rabin in the early 90s, so the famous handshake in the White House lawn with Bill Clinton, and that led to the Nobel Peace Prize. Fatah essentially, as an organization, wrote off terrorist actions and recognized Israel's existence and began to act as essentially as a state, trying to make peace with another state. Mm-hmm. Hamas, which is is still at this point, at least on paper, certainly sworn to destroy Israel, which does authorize acts of what some would call violent resistance, what others would call terrorism, and I think I draw the line at targeting civilians, which I think is terrorism. But no matter your motivations, I think targeting civilians is terrorism. That's fine. That's my opinion. Anyway, Hamas there were elections, and Hamas actually did reasonably well in elections. But in 2005, I believe, they took over Gaza essentially in a military coup, and they now rule Gaza as their own territory. So there's Hamas in Gaza and there's Fatah in the West Bank, and that's an oversimplification. Anyway, all right. I think when Netanyahu announced this possible annexation, he was doing it to appease his right wing. But I think pretty quickly what he recognized was that this would really destroy Fatah. And at some point, you can only do so much to, undermine the legitimacy of the more moderate group that you're trying to deal with without leaving yourself with nothing to deal with.
Right. So where are the moderate Arabs? I'm undermining them. That's where they are.
Exactly. So I think Netanyahu was looking for a way out as soon as he stepped his foot into that sort of briar patch. And once after Israel made this announcement, there was, to go back to what's going on today or yesterday, there was an op-ed published in Israel by Youssef Al-Taiba, and I apologize for the pronunciation. I'm not an Arabic speaker. He is the UAE's ambassador to the United States, and he's he worked closely with the current administration. The UAE is reasonably close to the Trump administration. Anyway, he said, "Listen, don't do this," to Netanyahu, and this is a quote that's quoted from the op-ed article. Annexation will definitely and immediately reverse all the Israeli aspirations for improved security, economic, and cultural ties with the Arab world and the United Arab Emirates. And then the headline was, it's either annexation or normalization. Well, light bulbs go off. If it's either annexation or normalization, then maybe if we pull back on annexation, we get normalization.
Okay.
That's how you play chess, right? I mean, that's
the trade that's offered, yeah.
You make an offer veiled as a threat, and the other side sees the offer veiled as a threat and takes you up on the offer. You get a deal, and so Netanyahu was able to pull back from something that if he had any strategic sense at all, he knew he had to pull back from, and in return he got something for it. Now, what he got for it was the formal normalization of relations, even though informally their relations were already moving in the right direction between these two countries. And a lot of this is really just about an anti-Iranian
Okay.
alliance. Essentially, the Saudis are in a death match essentially with Iran over leadership in the Muslim world, and the Gulf states are reasonably closely allied with the Saudis. The Saudis could not go first on his normalization with the Israelis, but maybe if the UAE goes first and then places like Oman and Bahrain go second, in a few years, Saudis can do it as well. And this is all part of this sort of Israel plus Sunnis are, together because they're both against the Shiite Iranian alliance with Hezbollah and perhaps with Syria as well. So it's all part of this sort of geopolitical stuff. So that's a very brief take on things. We can talk about whatever angles you want from here, I think.
Yeah, I think that lays a good groundwork for it. It makes some sense. We have discussed it a little bit in the past. We don't totally avoid the subject, and I guess it caught me a little bit by surprise only because I wasn't really anticipating any major announcement at any given point. But I think my first reaction when I saw exactly who was involved, UAE, and of course reminding myself that Jared Kushner was supposed to be in charge of Middle East peace, and then thinking, all right, well, we've read so much about Kushner and his relationship with in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman and with the Crown Prince in the UAE. We have the MBS and MBZ axis, and we found that basically in need of some sort of major foreign policy chops with an election coming up. It felt to me like they pulled something out of the drawer and said, well, can we work something out where, there's not really that much at stake as between. Traditionally, I've never really noticed anything about the relationship between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. It's just not really a discussion that I've ever been a part of. And it seemed like maybe this was the only Arab world relationship that Jared could pull out of the drawer and get somebody to sign to some agreement on, and it kind of felt that way to me. And I think I'm probably shortchanging it, but I wondered about that, and I wondered about also, for instance, how solid was how solid is a commitment from Netanyahu about anything long term? I guess is one question when you address his status in Israeli politics. I've been when we do bring it up, usually with Greg, we're all just like holding our breath. When will he be gone? How long can he last? Is it over for him? But he just never seems to be on his last legs here.
Right, he's the Michael Corleone of Israeli politics, except he doesn't want to get pulled out.
Right, every time
he doesn't have to be pulled back in. He's the one doing the pulling. But there's still some disagreements even here within it. Netanyahu is saying that as part of the agreement, he has agreed to suspend the push for annexation of these West Bank territories, whereas the UAE is saying, well, no, it's off the table.
You would think that would be
required. Right. I think there's everybody can. It's always tricky. I think Netanyahu has to manage himself in a democracy. He's getting criticized from the right, his right, and yes, there are people to his right, amazingly, over giving up this annexation. So he's saying, well, I'm not giving it up forever, whatever. Fine. Clearly, I think it's off the table. I don't think there's any question. He is very close to Trump. Let's get that right on the table here. And Trump was very, very involved in the rollout of this, as any American president would be. Let's be realistic. I mean, obviously, I already mentioned, right? Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shook hands on the White House lawn. They didn't shake hands, on the Champs-Élysées. I mean, obviously, the United States is going to be involved in a rollout. So that there's no criticism there. There is, I have seen news. I'm looking at an article right now that says that Netanyahu was asked to keep the pending agreement secret from his coalition partners in the other parties, right? He's in a coalition with this centrist party, the Blue and White Party, due to risk of leaks. Fine, and there's this whole question of allegations made by Netanyahu supporters that his coalition partner slash, rival in the last 3 elections, Benny Gantz, had his phone hacked by Iran. So there's all these questions about, well, he was, was he legitimately asked to keep it a secret? I have to say the timing is, let's just say the timing is perfect for Donald Trump if he wanted to, bring back the media focus to something, anything positive that he's done within 24 hours of the announcement of Kamala Harris. I'll just say it's fortuitous timing for Donald Trump that this announcement was made when it was, as opposed to a few days earlier, a few days later, or we could just leave it at that. There's I'm not suggesting there's any evidence, certainly not. But Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu work hand in hand. And so, again, when you're talking about two countries announcing a peace, essentially normalization, two countries that are not at war, when you're not actually trying to stop bullets firing, you could announce it any time you want, right?
I guess you would think so, yeah.
A day here or a day there, nobody's going to live or die. So let's just call it fortuitous timing for Donald Trump. But it's interesting when you're talking about, certainly to piggyback off what both of us have said, no, these are not countries that we, growing up, we thought of Israel having to worry about fighting a war with the United Arab Emirates. But there is this, there was this larger boycott, right? That, the entire Arab world essentially pretended Israel didn't exist from 1948 on, right? When there was no, occupied West Bank or Gaza or anything like that. And so the boycott, which started in 1948, has slowly, essentially shrunk with peace treaties with Egypt, with Jordan, and now with normalization with the UAE. It's part of that larger sense that, Israel is not, the Arab world is not going to pretend Israel doesn't exist anymore. That doesn't mean that they should stop advocating for the Palestinians, because they should. Palestinians deserve the freedoms and rights of any other group of people. But you don't have to say that somebody doesn't exist in order to negotiate with them, right? I mean, China is abusing the Uyghurs. China has occupied and abused Tibet for how many decades? Countries don't pretend China doesn't exist in order to advocate for those oppressed groups. So I think any step towards better relations or relations at all is a good thing, and can hopefully lead to greater peace.
Well, it would be nice if they did. That's for sure. And it just it did strike me just because UAE seemed sort of out of the blue. And I knew that Kushner, whose job it was ostensibly to come up with something that they could hold up as an accomplishment come election time, had two, I guess, aces in the hole there, Mohammed bin Zayed or Mohammed bin Salman. And as you mentioned, bin Salman can't be the first one out of the box from Saudi Arabia. So he went to the other guy and managed to hammer something out. Now, they got something out of it, too. It wasn't simply a deal for the benefit of the Palestinians, in at least the West Bank Palestinians. As I understand it, they, to no one's surprise, they're being offered American weapons, advanced weaponry, for which I don't know what sort of purpose necessarily they have in mind for it. But I guess at least now, with this agreement in hand, you can say, well, the likelihood that they would be used against Israel is taken off the table. So now we can have them viciously oppress someone else, maybe the Yemenis. I'm not certain who they have in mind. But, so they'll be getting some advanced weaponry and some drone weaponry out of it. But I understand as far as the Israelis go, there are some smaller scale benefits to their ending this standoff and this boycott, and I guess some regional economic development consortia in which they'll now be able to participate. I don't think anybody was holding their breath for the day when people could fly direct from Jerusalem to Doha, but I guess that's a nice side benefit too. And there's an awful lot of business being done there regionally, and I guess that's of some benefit. But other than that, it was a bit of a surprise to me, just because I didn't think the world was waiting with bated breath for the UAE and Israel to normalize But I'm glad they did, and they might be able to get something good out of it in terms of. I hope that they'll be able to get some permanence out of this suspension. And this is an interesting thing whenever you're negotiating a peace agreement between Hebrew-speaking Israelis, Arabic-speaking Arabs, with the brokerage of the English-speaking United States, and there's sometimes just the translation of the documents can have different shades of meaning in terms of what they think they're agreeing to, and but I think they've learned to fall back on that too, and to be able to say, well, we're not 100% sure exactly what we hammered out here, but that'll be negotiated in the coming days.
Right. I mean, there's a nice piece at Axios that really lays out some things. I think you're certainly right to highlight the UAE is not, a force for good all over the world here. Certainly, they're doing some awful things with Yemen, and it might well be exactly that. This clears it's a scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Right? It clears the way for some weapons to be sold to the UAE, which is unfortunately going to be a bad thing for the people on the other end of those weapons. And then this business about the meaning, right? On the one hand, there's the access thing lays out some interesting things, right? Netanyahu again says the suspension of the annexation plan is temporary, and then MBZ called the agreement a roadmap to normalization rather than an actual agreement for normalization, right? So even there, it's iffy. It's iffy what the exact meaning is.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess that it's still up in the air. We'll see whether there's more to analyze in terms of this, in terms of, also a bunch of regional problems with COVID-19 to deal with there. I wonder if they need closer cooperation on that. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ian Reifowitz still with us. One of the things, I guess, on our way out, on our way out out the door from the first break, I was just mentioning, and I spoke to Ian about it, just filling in background. I don't think it bears at all on the actual peace agreement. But those of you who have seen my nightly tweets about the stats internationally and here at home about COVID-19, just laying out the basics of who's adding more cases to the world count and who's not, and who's doing it more quickly than others. The fact of the matter is that the Persian Gulf states are aflame with COVID-19 case growth. They're small, generally speaking, small states, so they're not adding in terms of the total numbers as much, not nearly as much as, say, the United States, and now recently India as well as Brazil. But when you list things out per capita, or the number of cases per million in population, just another way of expressing the same thing, a lot of those micro states in the Gulf are at the top of the list. UAE not chief among them, but it does appear high up there, and those probably in the top 20 or so. But Qatar has been topping the list for probably 2 months now, and I think it's largely their migrant worker population that usually bears the brunt of everything there, and in the UAE and other states similarly situated. But I think they are above like a 4% infection rate in terms of their entire population. They have some 4,000 something cases per million, and a real standout in that sense. But Bahrain also frequently in the top 10 list, occasionally Kuwait as well, Oman also in there. Basically every one of the Arabian Peninsula states has appeared there so far, except for Yemen, which I attribute to the fact that they're probably not even counting very closely because they got bigger problems. But I would not be at all surprised to find out that that it turns out at some point when they get a handle on, if they ever get a handle on those numbers, they'll also be at the top of the list. And Iraq and Iran also posting big numbers, really surrounding the Persian Gulf, which I guess doesn't surprise me a great deal given how worried the world once was about MERS, which was Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, before the days, I guess, when we decided to stop naming it after scapegoat countries or regions. But anyway, the other thing we wanted to get back to and mention about as we were exiting, the possibility that there was domestic American politics at play in terms of the timing. It does seem awfully likely. It's, I guess, the least of Trump's transgressions by far. There's nothing particularly wrong with his strategizing with it. But there was at least one more indication that you wanted to mention in favor of arguing that the timing had been engineered?
Sure. And yeah, let's be clear. This is politics 101. It's exactly the least of Trump's transgressions. If anything, I'm giving him some credit for being or having some, at least somebody on his team who's clever enough to do this. But according to the Axios, piece, the agreement was reached in principle several days ago, and it was, as we said, kept secret from from Netanyahu's coalition partners. So the agreement was reached several days ago. Clearly, we saw it on Tuesday. Biden has an imminent announcement for vice president. Biden has made his decision, blah, blah, blah. It's not a stretch to think that if the agreement was reached in principle several days ago and we knew the VP announcement was coming, that once it was announced that Biden had made his pick, that the Trump people could have said to Netanyahu, all right, let's get this set up to roll out to win the news cycle, the day after. I mean, maybe you could argue that if he had been really manipulating things, he would have wanted to have it out on the same day. But I think then he would have, if I was Trump, I wouldn't have wanted it on the same day because the VP announcement might have then overshadowed this. And he would want a day for himself for this, to be the next thing rather than on the same day. So if the agreement is reached, days ago and then finalized, it says it was finalized Wednesday in a conference call between Trump and Netanyahu and MBZ, and that gave Trump, that teed Trump up to make the announcement on Thursday after probably after about 24 hours of, Biden and Kamala Harris and everybody going, all right, well, I've heard enough about Kamala Harris now. What's the next thing? Bam, Trump has some good news for himself.
Yeah.
It was a bad 24 hours after Kamala Harris's announcement because Trump and basically everybody in the Republican Party made themselves look like fools, criticizing her in contradictory ways, being a far left radical and then also betraying liberals. They all went to the racism and the sexism, and so here Trump has at least something to crow about that. A, has nothing to do with Kamala Harris, and B, is an actual accomplishment. So. Give him some credit for that, but I wouldn't be shocked if there was a little bit of timing manipulation.
Yeah. Well, right. It's that at least is within bounds and considered, I think, largely fair play in regular American politics. So, congratulations and welcome to normalcy in that respect. I guess. We'll take it. Okay, so not too much to tease out of it. I will be watching, I guess, to see what comes of it. If anything, it just doesn't seem like there's a great deal on the table that Americans in the main will be interested in watching. But this will be spoken of come campaign time. We brought peace to the Middle East, even if it's just two tiny portions of it. But if it can stabilize the annexation question for a while, we'll take it. It's welcome. But as you were saying, and maybe this makes the better transition then, the thought process probably was, yes, we'd like to grab the spotlight back from the Democrats, who were enjoying it for at least a 2-day span following the naming of Kamala Harris to the presidential ticket, though they did try their best to go to their normal racism, sexism play. It didn't appear to work for them very well, and this is a positive way out. And I think it was actually small enough in terms of the caliber of the news that it would likely have been overshadowed had they tried it the same day. So wise of them to delay. But so here we are. I know they must have been annoyed that Trump was probably annoyed that his usual play of calling an impromptu press conference wasn't enough to draw all the networks off of the vice presidential selection. I don't know if he really ever believed that was going to work, but who knows? He's not all there. It was a foolish idea, and it proved foolish by the fact that a couple of the networks didn't even bother switching over to his coverage. So this one, I guess he thought the serious news folks, not the campaign types that he thinks of as fake news. I'm sure he dismisses the rest of the news as fake news when it's convenient too. But there would be a demand that, we've got to cover this. Is Middle East peace. Everyone wants news about that. But
right, sure. I mean,
okay.
Look, when two countries that aren't shooting at each other make peace, we don't want to say that changes the world, but it is a good thing.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll take that and bank it and watch and see what the Trump administration and Trump campaign, if there's any difference between the two of them, tries to do with it. Although that leads to a whole other subject I guess we could talk about. So we'll lay that out as a possibility, both diving perhaps further into Kamala Harris and her backstory, or on the other hand, we could go with the other interesting domestic political direction of how much Trump is doing overtly to blur the lines and erase the lines between the Trump administration, such as it is, and the Trump campaign, and how many more American political norms he's intentionally blowing up. I did see that he managed to get the Office of Legal Counsel the other day to issue a memo saying, sure, your idea of giving your Republican National Convention nomination acceptance speech from the South Lawn of the White House is perfectly legal. Go for it. Everyone's going to love it. And you should go ahead and do that and not worry about it, based on the idea that the president and vice president are specifically exempted from the Hatch Act, which would normally prohibit the intermingling of official duties and official resources and political resources and political activity. My sense is, and I guess we've got to find a Hatch Act expert for this one, is that the exemptions for the president and vice president were meant, generally speaking, to avoid having to worry about investigating or prosecuting the two highest-ranking officials every time they inadvertently maybe mixed politics with official business, because sometimes it feels like it can't be avoided. The president is flying on Air Force One and is called by a political aide with news that may or may not be official, but may have some political implications, and we can't be parsing out how much of the phone bill should be paid by the political party versus the taxpayer funding. Although that did come up because apparently some of the folks pointing out the discrepancies in the Hatch Act with this idea did mention we did actually have the DNC pay to install a completely separate phone line on Air Force One for Barack Obama so that would never even become an issue. But here's this guy now intentionally obliterating the line and saying, I will use the White House, the most official of official resources, as a backdrop for a speech just to give the television impression that this is the one and only true president, and he must be returned to the White House for another 4 years, as you can tell by the beautiful columns behind me. Oh, don't you remember when Barack Obama was in trouble for using columns on a stage once because he was setting
terrible
Roman emperor, I believe. Yeah.
I think you raised about four really interesting points there.
Take anyone you like.
So I think what this whole business with the Hatch Act demonstrates is that today's Trumpy Republican Party, which is not just Donald Trump, because I count, and I'll explain in a second, I count Mitch McConnell and the others in this as well. They look at rules and laws that were drawn up to be recognized and obeyed in spirit, because it's impossible to play out every, small scenario in letter. But, when you have people who respect the democratic system and respect, the principles of our constitutional democracy, they're going to respect the spirit of these things. It's, okay, where the Democrats will install another phone line. Yeah. Trump, instead of looking at the possibility of how he can, obey the spirit of the law by, for example, not using the White House to make a speech, says, if it's not something that's written that is directly forbidden, screw that, I'll do it. Right? Yeah. And it's just like Trump and Merrick Garland. McConnell and Merrick Garland. Is this how it's supposed to work when a Supreme Court nominee is offered up by a president? No, it's not. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says that an asshole can't ignore the nomination of a sitting president 10 months before the election or 10 months before the end of his term. So therefore, if it's not forbidden, I'll do it. That's how today's Republican Party operates. Party power, naked grabbing of power, all of these systems that are designed to work well by people who care more about the health of the democracy than they do about winning the battle of the moment. Those are systems that will be abused by people who don't care more about democracy and about the country's, the people's respect for the system than they do about their own power. And that's why McConnell is just as bad as Trump. You see it there. And that's why the Merrick Garland thing is the thing that we're going to keep coming back to over and over again. It was a sea change in American politics. Not that you didn't have earlier examples, but it was and this is before Trump got in office, it was the death knell of the idea that Republicans would ever say to themselves, well, we could do this. We're not barred from doing it, but it will hurt the health of our democracy. That was the final removal of any possible notion anybody had that Republicans would ever make that kind of consideration. So why not make your announcement for president, accept the nomination for president in front of the White House or behind the White House? Why not? Look at how all the other ridiculous things that they've done. There is no health of the democracy. There's only the status of their power. That's their only consideration.
Well, it fits in then with the way they've been treating these things. I think at the outset, I guess in early days, I just recall that there was a controversy that I don't know whether what people based on. I guess maybe it was Trump and his use of his own private Trump plane at political events, and I guess somebody once broached the question, well, if you were to win the election, would you know that you can't use Air Force One as a campaign prop? He used to, do rallies at airports because I guess he was too lazy to drive from an airport to wherever people were waiting. He loves airport rallies. And maybe they're even a little bit old-fashioned. He's probably just hearkening back to like sort of Kennedy-era arrivals at airports.
Well, it's like the whistle stop, the whistle stop train rallies. Anyway, go on. Closer,
sorry. But so he was asked about that, and I think, but in early days in 2017, there were White House press folks who were at pains to insist that, no, we know where the boundaries are. We're not idiots. We will never use Air Force One. We would never use Air Force One as a backdrop for a political rally. And I think shortly after, you began to see it at every one of his political rallies. And even at rallies that weren't taking place at the airport, there were stadium rallies, he would order the pilots to do a low flyover of the stadium to show off Air Force One. Here comes your president on Air Force One. And now he's just doing airport rallies where it's parked right behind him. And sometimes I guess you can't tell. It's not always are they originally scheduled to be political rallies. Sometimes they're billed as presidential news conferences, and he just gives anti-Biden speeches or whoever he feels like attacking that day in front of Air Force One. So right away, they threw that out the window, and I guess that should have signaled to us. I don't think anybody was fooled, even when they announced this thing a couple of days ago, the idea that he would do it on the White House lawn. Half of America said, that will be illegal. Even if the president is exempt from the Hatch Act, there are other workers there who aren't, who would be essential in setting this thing up. But I think most people said, it really wouldn't matter. It's true that in all likelihood, there will be illegality within it. And he is going to do it anyway. And he will do it because he knows that people will say, but that's illegal. And yet nothing will happen to him. And it makes him look maybe above the law and vulnerable to the law. Certainly owning libs. So I guess he's decided to roll ahead and go with it. And should come as no surprise. And there'll be more like it as time goes on, I suppose.
Right. Well, look, they didn't lie. They said they would not use Air Force One for a political rally. They haven't. They've used it for every political rally. But right, I mean, and then to go back to one of the other 4 great points you made in the first section there, you talked about what's the distance between the Trump administration and I think you said in post office, right? Or maybe I'm thinking about it. There is no distance anymore between the Trump campaign and the post office, right? The post office now works for the Trump campaign at the highest levels, right? I mean, what other barrier won't you cross if you're willing to use the White House as a political prop? You're willing to use the post office to help you steal. I mean, my God, who could have possibly imagined? But this is what Trump does by having so many outrages. Each new outrage is less outrageous than it would have been if it was the first outrage.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
I mean,
flooding
could you
the
have
zone.
Imagined the explosion, and I mean literally explosion from the right wing and frankly from Democrats and because we actually have principles. If Barack Obama had started to change the way the post office operated in ways that he felt maybe could help him with re-election, Democrats would have been right up there with Republicans screaming that this is an unacceptable. But Democrats would have impeached him and removed any Democrat who mucked around. We actually care about the democracy, and they don't. They don't. If there were any principles at all, if you're a Republican and you see Trump doing this, the minimum you can do is immediately become a public anti-Trumper. And what you should be doing is voting with Democrats to take action to redress what Trump is doing here, because it's banana republic. It's anti-democratic. Look, come on. We all democracy relies on the post office being non-political. I mean, it doesn't get more non-political in terms of what something should be than the post office. Yeah. And Trump is admitting, according to, you see the analyses today in the Times, on CNN.com, and we've talked about it there are things written about it on Daily Kos as well. He's basically admitted that he's taking these stances on funding for the post office in order to match up with his election needs and his election concerns about mail-in voting. I mean, how can this be?
It's not supposed to be. I mean, again, in olden times, we used to argue about things like this with, down at the congressional level. This is a constant fight for, among staffers writing the newsletters, official newsletters for members of Congress, and whether you can use the franking privilege to send them free of charge. I've been through the process myself. There's strict limits on, even how many times per page on a printed newsletter you can refer to yourself in the first person or mention the name of the representative, just to make sure that you're not using postal privileges and using the post office for political purposes. It's that strictly regulated for congressmen. But for the president, who, according to the OLC, can't be indicted while sitting in office, you can do anything you want. Let's use the White House lawn, use Air Force One, use the post office, change the way it works for everybody. And a lot of people pointing out this will have enormous blowback possibilities for what would ordinarily be considered his base, rural older Americans who tend to rely on the post office for almost everything that they do, would be impacted directly. And I guess, I don't know whether this is a gamble that, hell, they're with me through thick and thin, no matter what. You can't change their minds as Trump supporters, or just simple delusion. This sounded like a great idea because it's going to own libs and make them frustrated, and it might actually suppress the vote as well. But, do I see that it might suppress my own voters' votes or anger my own voters when they can't get their medicine from the VA? I mean, you can't imagine a worse outcome for Republicans than screwing with medication for veterans in rural districts all over the heartland. But would someone risk it if they were also the sort of person who would say publicly, I think New York is in play? Why would people not vote for me? You look at it honestly, how could New Yorkers not vote for me? I've done so much for them, more than anybody and any president in history. And somebody who would imagine that that's true and that they might win New York on a Trumpster platform could also believe anything about the post office.
Well, let's look at it in a little more nefarious way. It's not. I don't think he necessarily is thinking about it in terms of helping him win one way or the other. Although, I mean, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But it may also just be, hey, this is my way of delegitimizing the Biden victory so that I can try to execute a coup d'etat and stay in office.
That would be much more nefarious. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Or we could be a little bit less nefarious, but still somewhat nefarious, and say he's just a chaos agent, and he doesn't care about anything. And even if he doesn't really think, he's not, even if he's not, plotting to stay in office because he's a megalomaniac, he's just a chaos agent who's like, let's have some fun. If I lose, I can just, throw the shit against the wall, excuse me, and my name will be on everybody's lips that much longer, and I'll just have a good time. So it's a question of is he which of those two terrible possibilities is he considering here with this post office thing, and is he want to delegitimize the election to become the lifetime ruler of the United States like President Xi, or does he just want to stir the pot because it's fun to stir the pot and that's who he is? I mean, either of these is awful to contemplate, but I think it's much more likely that it's about that than that it's about him having had his people run the numbers on how screwing with the mail is really going to help him in the Electoral College.
That could be. I mean, it is an awfully delicate. I don't know how you would do the math, and it's doable. Probably not by his people, but it's hard to tell where he's going with it. But maybe the more credible explanation is he got the idea in his head, and he thought it would be fun to do. I know that there was also once the theory floated, I guess early on when he was considering screwing around with the post office in less concrete ways, and I guess before the appointment of the new Postmaster General, but during his search for a new Postmaster General, when it was floated, the idea that so many of Amazon's packages are delivered in the last mile anyway, and particularly in rural areas, by the post office, that if he somehow screwed with the post office, he would be screwing with Amazon's business model and therefore screwing with Jeff Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post, which he hates. And although it seemed kind of tenuous, that does fit with Trump's mode of thinking. Because sometimes, I guess that's his most advanced, abstract thinking is, I will take convoluted roads to screwing with people I hate if I think it'll work. Exactly.
Yeah, I got the One Baby Zebra cartoon reference, which is a pretty obscure one, but given our conversation about what the men of a certain age and what we remembered from last week, which I can't believe I can't remember the reference that we shared, the one that you came up with.
Oh, offhand, yeah, well, okay.
Anyway, but the One Baby Zebra is one of my favorite things. It's did you watch Bugs Bunny as a kid? I'm sorry.
Yeah. You're watching it now, I guess.
right? Actually, maybe it was even Porky Pig. I don't remember. It was one of these, and it was the long story short is there was some kind of convoluted insurance policy that came through, and Porky Pig was going to have to, or Daffy Duck was going to have to pay Porky Pig if a million and one things happened. And he pulled out the insurance policy. Well, it has to be this, and it has to be that, and it has to be on July 4th, 1 minute before midnight. Da 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 da. And he goes, and then he goes, and one baby zebra. And then one baby zebra walks by on the screen. So that's the final thing in the insurance policy, the final stipulation, and Daffy Duck has to pay off. So when you were going through your litany of things to get to Jeff Bezos, all I could think of was, and one baby zebra.
We'll throw that one in there. And I found the video there on YouTube. So in case you didn't get to see it originally, in its original run, or probably, I guess when we saw it was probably like 30 years past its original run. But okay.
Right.
Still, it was a staple of our Saturday morning upbringing. So, okay.
You found the one baby zebra video? That's great.
Well, yeah, very quickly, as you were saying it. So I'll share it with everybody. Well, I didn't think we were going to land on this necessarily, but I knew we wanted to discuss the post office. So this was a good sort of a free-form Friday thing where we could get around to this. But thank you. We've covered some rather diverse topics, a lot of ground today, from international relations and Middle East peace to Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and the baby zebra insurance cartoon. We got it all in there, plus the post office, which everyone's got to focus on. Thanks, Ian. This one was a fun one. I bet you weren't expecting this. All right, so will we see you next Friday?
Sure.
Okay.
You want me to stay for a final goodbye? Or
yes, why don't we do that? And for everybody else, we'll be back for that final goodbye in just 1 minute. Hang on. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And we're just wrapping up here with Ian Reifowitz. Armando on tap wants to discuss the issues swirling around the Kamala Harris nomination. But, we took you in all sorts of directions here today. One direction that we haven't taken you in yet, of course, is discussing your actual scholarly writing, besides your recollection, your amazing encyclopedic recollection of Bugs Bunny cartoons as well. But just to remind everybody, this would be a good opportunity to do that, and we love to afford you the opportunity to tell everybody about your books, latest or otherwise, by the way. But just so everyone recalls, why don't you remind everybody where they can find your latest?
Well, thank you. So, sure. The latest book is The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. And that's, was available at, I don't want to say your local bookstores because it's out a few months now. So, but it's certainly Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all of your major, independent booksellers as well. So, folks can check that out if they like. And thank you again for having me on.
Sure.
Always a pleasure. And I will have something next week on the site that folks can catch. And so in the spirit of Porky Pig, why don't I end by saying, that's all, folks.
That'll do. Okay, well, we'll take it. Thanks very much for stopping by. And, I'll be interested to see, by the way, as the election season goes on and as you're joining us for Fridays through the election season, I'm curious whether there's a new book percolating in your head, or analyzing whether or to what extent Kamala Harris may be the next stage in inheriting the legacy of Obama and carrying that forward, and what that may mean for us, for continued tribalization, if unfortunately if we can't seem to purge ourselves of the Trump menace, or whether that's going to be with us forever, regardless of whether we purge ourselves of Trump personally or all like him, or what. But I suppose you're probably always thinking about where to go next on these things, and maybe that theme will develop here on the show.
Maybe.
All right. Very good. No pressure. Just want you to write your next book here. And we'll talk with you next Friday. Very good. Thanks, Ian. Take care. All right. Well, we'll be switching gears in the next few minutes as we wait for Armando to join us. I don't know whether Armando is listening along or not, but he's been, what do we say, champing at the bit, although because we don't like to pronounce chomping correctly for some reason, over the new birtherism, I guess, as it is. And you all are aware of the situation, of course, and anticipated it, I'm sure, that the moment it was announced that Kamala Harris would be joining the ticket, it was obviously instantly predictable that there would be sexist and racist attacks launched because, well, Donald Trump is a sexist and a racist and is running on a platform of sexism and racism. So, congratulations if you were able to correctly predict this. But this has taken, I don't know if it was unexpected necessarily that it would end up landing on new birtherism or birtherism 2.0. Certainly was predictable because Trump is one of the original birthers and the most annoying among them. But I don't know, maybe people hadn't given as much consideration yet to Kamala Harris's actual background, simply because she didn't win the presidential nomination and she hadn't yet been nominated to join the ticket as vice president. Well, I guess once people found out and all of the biographical pieces that were waiting in the wings at the various publications once they were printed, and Trump got word of them, he said, all right, well, or maybe they even had them pre-formulated and ready to go. Who knows? But no surprise. But there is a particular and interesting bent to this one, and I guess it's largely because first one out of the gate, I guess, with the stupid new birther charges was... I can't even remember the guy's name, but it was Armando was here and he can remind us of who it was. But it came from out of Newsweek magazine, which apparently, by the way, has been like completely gutted and retooled as some kind of weirdo right-wing publication. I had no idea.
Yeah,
but
in that sense, it's good to know that we knew it was a shell since whenever, even when it was owned by Tina Brown or ran by Tina Brown.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it was never really a major factor, and I guess we all sort of thought as they limped along, Time and Newsweek both, like the era of the News Weekly magazine in the internet era, you would think they were on their last legs. You can't publish weekly in this atmosphere and be considered relevant.
Yeah, but Time is still Time. Whatever it's
well,
relevant.
I mean, just they were due for something, death or standards. Retooling. Yeah,
Newsweek standards went down before.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really noticed the decline of standards at Newsweek. I noticed, for instance, every once in a while when I saw something that grabbed my interest, for good or for ill, from either of them, I said, "Oh yeah, they're still around." I mean, when are they going to be gone? They can't, and they didn't publish weekly. They moved to an internet model, certainly, and were constantly publishing. But by that point, they were just irrelevant. And then, finances being what they are, I think at that point I started to notice that Newsweek was restructuring itself in some way in an effort to try to survive. And I never really noticed where they landed because I didn't care when they started. So, but now, this article got published, and I think, I think the idea clearly, not just of this article, but of what they're doing over there is, well, maybe this would be a great opportunity to take advantage of the Newsweek brand. There's, millions of people out there who, if they see this is published at Time or Newsweek, will give it weight because it used to have weight, and we can publish all sorts of insanity that if it was published by the Federalist Society, it would be immediately recognized as garbage. Let's put it in Newsweek. But who was the guy? I don't even remember. What you have the name at hand?
John Eastman.
Okay.
He's a or was a professor, maybe he is again, at a place called Chapman Law School, which is some little, frankly, diploma mill in Orange County, California, which employs, just for the record, also one Hugh Hewitt.
Oh.
To give you an example of the rigor of that institution.
Yes. All right.
Now, he actually was credentialed in the classic right-wing Federalist Society sense. He clerked for Justice Thomas, all that kind of nonsense, and worked at a big law firm. But he's just a crank. I mean, and on this issue, he's especially a crank, and that's why, in many respects, I want to talk about this more, because people, to describe it as just racist birtherism really doesn't do justice to what's going on here, and what I think is the larger threat. I mean, yes, there are elements who just want to muddy the waters for political reasons in this particular election, just as they did with Obama and the birth certificate nonsense back in 2008. The difference that I would like to draw attention to is that with regard to Barack Obama, the argument was he wasn't born in the United States.
Yeah.
That he had a fake birth certificate. That he
was
was
the claim.
Born in Indonesia. I don't know where they ended up saying they thought he was born.
Kenya, as I recall.
Kenya, whatever.
Maybe,
I mean, the point being, he was the argument rose or fall on the birth certificate, which is a factual issue, which is, was he born in the United States, making him a natural-born citizen of the United States and thus eligible to be president or vice president, etc. This argument is wholly different and is actually consistent with a long-running crank theory of this guy and other racists like him to basically say that there is no such thing as natural-born citizenship as you understand it. Yes, it's true. Well, actually, it doesn't. I think it doesn't even make sense on its own logic. But let me explain to you as I understand it. They're saying that the argument was with the natural-born citizen clause, and we'll go through it if you like in detail. But the essence of it is being born in the United States isn't enough. You have to be born in the United States, quote, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which is consistent with the language. But what does it mean to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? If you do not have American citizen parents,
yeah, I mean,
then you are then your parents are subject to a foreign power, and therefore you are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, this is
I've never seen that work for anybody, but okay.
It doesn't work. It's an interesting aside, by the way, is that what really highlights this ridiculousness is that the Indian tribe case in Oklahoma, where Gorsuch and others joined him, and there's a decision that Native Americans are not subject to federal law in Oklahoma. Now, why they are still subject to state law under that theory, I would love to hear Gorsuch's explanation, but that's for another day. The reason being, well, they they had a treaty, they were a nation, they were promised this, there was a compact, and then somehow Gorsuch still says you can opt out of it if Congress wants to. I don't understand any of that, but the point I'm trying to bring to you is a case called Dalk versus Wilkins, which predated a case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark, which you and I have talked about before, but I'm going to talk about that case a lot now. But the case of Elk v. Wilkins declared that a Native American was not a U.S. citizen because he was not subject to the United States, but it went along the lines of they were excluded because of these treaties, and they were part of another nation, even though it's contained within our nation. It was convoluted, but basically it said, no, you're not a citizen because you're a citizen of your Indian tribe, right?
Okay.
Is sort of the theory. But that obviously doesn't hold for people who are not Native Americans or members of an Indian tribe, because there is no such treaty that is within the jurisdiction of the United States that talks about that. I mean, there are other treaties about diplomats and things like that, and that all obviously also excludes people from being United States citizens. As you know, if you're not subject to the jurisdiction, i.e. subject to the laws of the United States, then you're not, even if you're naturally born in the United States, you're not a citizen. And it's a very common son of foreign diplomats, and it's never happened. We don't, certainly since the War of 1812, but there has not been a foreign occupying army in the United States where there would be a hostile foreign power, and if they had children, which imagine what they mean by that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The raping and the pillaging, I guess, is the idea. But then they also would, because those foreign powers were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States either.
Okay.
Anyway, those are the two exceptions. It's well understood. This fellow John Eastman writes this piece, and it's a long-standing piece because he has been trying, a long-standing argument he's had, because he has been trying to read the natural-born citizen clause to exclude
anybody you can, really.
Born in the United States of foreign parents from the citizenship.
This was an early project in the early days of the Trump administration when they were threatening to, they came right out of the box. Said, we're going to repeal the Birthright Citizenship clause.
Right. Yes, exactly. This is not, or interpret it the way this fellow Eastman wants them to. Yeah. Now, they have no power to do that. There's no citizenship registry in the United States. So what exactly that would mean, I don't know. But it did come up in the context of the census for reasons that are twofold. One, it is an apportionment fight, because remember, this census is supposed to reapportion our representation for the next 10 years. And if they wanted to exclude non-citizens from the count, this is also a constitutional provision everybody might be familiar with, that every 10 years there has to be a census and the Congress is reapportioned as a result of it. Now,
there has to be a post office too, but
there's supposed to be a post office too. There's supposed to be an act. Cabinet members are supposed to be confirmed by the Senate. A lot of things that the Constitution said that don't seem to be the case in this administration. But in terms of this, there's a couple of points. Now, people talk about it in terms of the racism, and it's obviously racism, but it's worse. And in a sense, I think it needs to come to light in this way. It's worse than, as I said, the Obama situation, because it really applies to millions of people. And just for full disclosure, it would apply to me. If this argument is correct that Eastman is positing, I am not a citizen of the United States. My parents came to the United States from a foreign country. They were granted asylum. In the first instance, it was temporary. Honestly, I couldn't tell you when they formulated their permanent residency status, and then eventually they became citizens after 10 or 12 years. But I know for a fact at the time I was born, my parents were still here on a temporary status. So according to this theory that's being propounded, even though I was born in the United States, I am not a citizen of the United States. And there are millions like me. And it doesn't take much guesswork. There's 11 million undocumented aliens in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
By definition, you would argue legally they're here illegally, so they are temporary. They're not here as permanent residents, or they haven't even achieved that. Even though if they lived here 25 years and had, the intention was, by law, they can be excluded from the country. Their children, according to this theory, would not be citizens of the United States. Now, this, of course, goes to the anchor baby stuff that you heard many times before. So this all circles into these things. Now, is there anything to it, or is it just offensive to me that these arguments are being made? No, there's nothing to it. Let's be clear. There is a case that I mentioned just before called United States versus Wong Kim Ark that decided this issue, not a different issue. This issue, it's been decided. by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1898. Wong Kim Ark was the son of Chinese nationals who were residing in the United States.
Yes.
And the United States government took the position that because his parents were Chinese nationals, he was not an American citizen. The Supreme Court said that you're wrong. That there is no dependence on the status of your parents to determine whether you're a natural-born citizen. A natural-born citizen, born in the United a person born in the United States is, by definition, a natural-born citizen. Now, ironically, and I'm going to take a minute to just talk about this with you, the question of persons born to American citizens outside of the United States isn't as clear.
No.
For example, Ted Cruz, who this same fellow said was absolutely, of course he's a natural-born citizen.
All right, well, figures.
Okay, but you can't go to this Wong Kim Ark case or the Constitution and make that statement. You actually have to take a couple more leaps. But let's talk about Ted Cruz. Then I'll talk about Marco Rubio, but let's talk about Ted Cruz for a second.
All right.
Ted Cruz was not born in the United States, he was born in Canada.
Yes.
His father was not a United States citizen. Right?
Right.
He was a Cuban citizen because he didn't come to the United States at that point. He went to Canada. His mother was an American citizen. Okay?
Yeah.
And by congressional authorization, a person born of an American citizen outside the United States is a natural-born citizen. But the question I would pose to any legal scholar is this. Can Congress amend the Constitution by statute?
No.
So my question to you is, before that law passed, Ted Cruz would not have been a natural-born citizen.
Yeah. Can
Congress amend the Constitution and make people natural-born citizens?
Well, they certainly can't amend the Constitution to do it. I'm trying to think if there's any way you can...
Here's how I would argue their side. No, the Constitution contemplated that Congress could do this.
Okay.
It was an open... It reserved to Congress the question of whether that type of person could become a natural-born citizen.
All right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That would be the argument. I could argue the other side of it, too. It says, no, there's no way. The text says what it says and what it meant at the time, and there's no way Congress can go back and change what the founders meant.
Okay.
If they wanted that type of person to be a natural-born citizen, they should have included it in the clause.
Yeah,
that's the other side of the argument, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's an argument. I frankly fall on the side that I've already told you. I think he is a natural-born citizen because I believe the Constitution permitted Congress to create that class of natural-born citizen. But,
okay.
You know, a textualist could very easily argue the other side of this.
Yes.
But what a textualist can't do is argue what Eastman is arguing. That a person born in the United States is not a citizen. It's just not possible from the text, the history, because the entire discussion of Wong Kim Ark goes through the whole English common law tradition, which is different from the Roman civil law, which has citizenship passing through the parents. It passes through where you were born. That no serious person can argue this. And in fact, the guy doesn't argue that it doesn't happen that way. He's saying there's other conditions.
Yeah, it was sort of a just saying article.
Yes.
Okay.
And the argument that he's trying to pose is that in the Wong Kim Ark case, which he has to deal with, he either has to argue that Wong Kim Ark case is wrong and should be overruled, but he doesn't want to do that because now it's settled law, right? Because then there is no questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he argues that his argument requires a reversal of a 122-year-old Supreme Court opinion unchallenged or even questioned in 122 years by any court. What's he left with his argument? Well, nothing. I'm a crank. I think the Supreme Court was wrong.
Yeah, well, it's a hobby for professors.
Sure, but once you admit that it's settled law, but that you think is wrong, then there's nothing left to your argument. You don't get to write in Newsweek that it's an open question. It's not an open question. It's a closed question. It's an absurd question. And so he has to try to distinguish Wonka by taking one fact, and that is that the parents of Wonka were described in the case as permanent residents at the time. That is, they had a house, they lived there, they worked there.
Right, but not described as citizens or naturalized.
All right, and he says the difference with Kamala is that her parents were here on student visas, maybe. He doesn't know.
Yeah, that was very striking to me, reading through. He doesn't actually know this. I would have maybe looked that up.
Right. But whether they were here on student visas or not really doesn't determine the question either.
Oh, well, then maybe I wouldn't have looked it up.
Let me tell you why.
Okay.
We know the facts. Where did Kamala Harris's mother go to live after she finished her PhD at Berkeley?
Offhand, I don't know, but
she went to live in Oakland, California, or she didn't go anywhere. She stayed in Oakland, California.
Right.
So, was she a permanent resident of California? Yes.
Sure, they looked like that.
She never left California.
Yeah, I don't know what her plans were, but she didn't appear to leave.
Well, think about that. So, how do you determine what her plans were? What makes somebody permanent? It doesn't actually matter. Here's why.
Okay.
I'm sorry to have bored you with it, but I just wanted to show the sophistry and the dishonesty of this. Yeah. Okay. Why doesn't it matter? Because the entire Wonka case, except for the recitation of the fact in the beginning, the permanence or temporariness of the continuation of the Kimar parents being in the United States was irrelevant. They never mention it. They say the opposite, in fact. Okay, they say that the case that the law is well established on this, and the point is that whether you're here for a day or you're here for 20 years, and if on that day your child is born there,
that's it.
That's it.
So all the fears of the right wing about anchor babies are perhaps founded there.
Well, it's true.
Okay.
I mean that's how we do it.
Yeah.
I mean that's just the reality of our Constitution. You want to amend the Constitution? Go to court. I mean, go petition. It
is. I guess that's available to you, and that does bring up an interesting point. As I've seen, Bobble speak tweeting at us now. I guess it raises the question. I am sure they don't want to go there, but since we're just guessing, as Eastman does, I'm not really sure about what anybody's immigration status was. But does anybody know Trump's mother's immigration status? Was she ever naturalized?
Well, I believe she was Scottish, but Eastman would tell you, but his father was a citizen. But
maybe.
I don't know if that's true either, because what about his grandfather, who was deported back to Bavaria, but Bavaria wouldn't take him back or something?
Yeah, right. So, it was one of the problems with really with Eastman's theory at all. I mean, I think that the court there in Wong was probably going for some sort of finality here and bright line drawing, and say, rather than tracing back, what if they've been here for 6 generations, but that first generation there was a defect in rendering the 5th generation back not a citizen, which of course calls into question the 4th generation. Much better to simply say born here, citizen. That was their point, I think. We'll take
That's the English rule. It's the rule of the Constitution. It's what was understood. It's what's embodied in the 14th Amendment.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with Armando on the question of how legitimate, on what legitimate basis, if any, is there for John Eastman to have gotten away with publishing his revised birtherism in Newsweek. So I think we're finding it pretty groundless, probably to no one's surprise, but yeah, I found the whole article. I mean, I read it because people were talking about it. I didn't find it particularly persuasive, but the parts that jumped out at me were, as we mentioned, the parts where he says, I haven't really checked out whether or not anybody had been naturalized at any point, so which might render the whole thing moot, or maybe not in his view, but it does raise some serious questions, and I guess I think helps illustrate the point, as we were saying as we exited to the break.
The naturalization point...
Yeah, go ahead.
The naturalization point actually comes up on him questioning whether she has the right to be a senator. Because to be a senator, you have to be a citizen.
Yeah.
And she could have become a naturalized citizen, I guess would be his interpretation, if her parents, either one of her parents had naturalized before she was 16. Again, it's an arcane bit of immigration law, but I don't think that he would hold that to mean that she was a natural-born citizen. That is, she was not a citizen at birth. She only became a citizen after her mother became a citizen.
Okay. Still, I thought an odd thing to
the whole thing is ridiculous,
researching.
But it's just completely dishonest on the discussion of Wong Kim Ark, because he tries to play it off like permanent resident is the issue. And then you'll find out later that, well, all these illegals aren't permanent residents. They're here illegally. They can't be permanent. So that's where I know they're going, and that's where he's gone. That's where he's gone before. So, I know his end game, and I think the end game is very pernicious and not as simple as just some racist political tactic. But this is where I suggest, on a political side, that we highlight exactly what, and Trump, of course, talked about it approvingly, a very talented lawyer, he called him. In fact, he's praised the man many times on Twitter. What Trump is saying is first-generation Americans aren't citizens.
Okay. Yeah, that's a new one.
And to take on that argument, I would, first of all, break it up, but just as a legal matter, I'm going to quote to you from the United States v. Wong Kim Ark case, which says, to hold that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution excludes from citizenship the children born in the United States of citizens or subjects of other countries would be to deny citizenship to thousands of persons of English, Scotch, Irish, German, or other European parentage who have always been considered and treated as citizens of the United States. Of course, Eastman's argument is he wants to exclude all the Latinos and Vietnamese and Chinese and Caribbean Islanders and everybody except white people I don't know. He'd probably figure out a way to include Europeans now, I assume, white Europeans, but maybe he'd sacrifice them anyway. But
Maybe.
that question was posed in 1898. People made the argument to this court, this Supreme Court in 1898 on the Wong-Kim-Ark case, that John Eastman is proposing now. And by unanimous decision, the Supreme Court rejected that argument. It's a decided issue. Okay? They want to reverse Wong-Kim-Ark. He doesn't want to say that because then there's no hook about Harris, right? As the law stands, of course she's a natural-born citizen. She was born in the United States. So what's the end game? The end game for him is to get traction and convince, at some point, a Trumpian court to overrule Wong-Kim-Ark and to eliminate natural-born citizenship.
Which was their, one of their early announced goals, and they, I guess, could not see any way clear to do it except by overturning it. And I guess this is I guess it was a relatively low priority for them because you didn't see them talk about it a great deal, and maybe they
talked about it early on. Remember INS, and there was a lot of talk about challenging the whole idea of natural-born citizenship. One of the arguments was, can the president unilaterally just say, well, you're not a natural-born citizen? The Supreme Court doesn't have the last word on it. It was sort of an argument that was being floated, and we've seen it before on DACA now. So it's just another species of lawlessness. But, what happens is when you talk about the law, at the end of the day, the norms of the United States for many years has been that the Supreme Court has the final say on the Constitution and interpreting the law.
I mean, kind of rises even above the level of well, that's our norm. It's a basic understanding that everybody's gotten.
Well, that's what we thought since Marbury v. Madison, of course.
Right.
But
you could just be wrong about that.
But let's get to it. How do you change an interpretation of the Constitution? You can amend the Constitution. That's kind of hard.
Right.
You can change the justices on the Supreme Court.
True. Right.
And they can overrule.
Right. Well, we've discussed that a number of times, obviously. Get 5 people willing to say, to hell with everything. Then,
but let's be serious. I mean, in 20 years, there's not going to be enough white evangelicals to allow Republicans to be what they are. They're either going to adapt or they're going to die.
All right,
unless I can exclude all these people from voting.
Yes, right, okay.
So, okay, I don't get you out of the country, or maybe I can, or maybe I can deport you. But let's say that's too extreme. Deporting 15 million people is going to be hard. Deporting 25 million people is going to be hard.
Yeah, you can't.
But you know what I can do? I can say you're not a citizen, and since you're not a citizen, guess what? You don't get to do.
Right.
You don't get to vote.
Right. Well, that's been a long-term plan of theirs as well. This is just a sort of a new angle, and I never thought it would necessarily reach to the point where they say, well, there are certain U.S. senators who shouldn't be allowed to vote, as a matter of fact. But I guess that was eventually coming. It's kind of startling, is all. Meanwhile, they're not doing particularly well.
It's startling yet predictable, and the reason I would elevate this issue in a different way than just talking about another racist birthday conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you can reach certain voters like me. I mean, you have my vote, but suppose there's people like me, first-generation Americans, who aren't thinking so much about it. They're going about their business,
right,
trying to make a living, trying to get by. But tell them that their kids and themselves might be deported because Trump is doing this.
Right.
Make it about them.
Okay.
So make it about Harris. Make it about them, because in the end, in the long run, it is about them. This is not some willy-nilly thing that we've only seen this time. This is a consistent thing that has been argued.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
So in the census context, in the voting context, in the apportionment context, in funding context. There's a case from the early 2000s called Plyler Veto, early 1980s, which took on a Texas statute that didn't want to allow the children of undocumented immigrants to go to public school.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, by the way, it was a 5-4 decision, which is shocking
Okay.
when you go back and look at it. But it said, no, Texas, you can't do that. That's an equal protection clause violation. But that's a court that William Brennan was on, and Thurgood Marshall.
Right.
The court now is there. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Alito.
Right.
These guys are capable of, I feel pretty confident they would have decided Plyler Veto differently. And at some point, maybe it'll take one more vote, maybe two. You could see Wong Kim Ark being decided differently. And that's how the Republicans win the project and beat the demographic destiny that faces them in the next 10 and 20 years.
Yeah. So you can't imagine that it could be hanging out there and that they wouldn't try to take a shot at it. Certainly. I mean, why not? They might as well. But seems to be their plan on a number of fronts, is you just use the courts to redefine whatever your problem is away. If your problem is we're a demographic minority, and in a democracy, a constitutional democracy where we determine things by majority vote, we have to make sure that the majority can't vote. Otherwise, we'll lose. And I suppose you could just fix it that way. I mean, we've seen it certainly through every other mechanism available to them. Gerrymandering, and you should see, of course, we were constantly reminded of just how badly gerrymandered some of the state legislatures are. They do their best, obviously, on a state-by-state basis to gerrymander Congress this way, and there were many years, even in this decade, during which there was a majority in the House of Republicans, though they netted by far the minority of the votes cast around the country. So long-term plan, and if they can take another shot simply by saying there's vast swaths of what was previously considered U.S. citizenry that just aren't anymore. That'll relieve their pressure. They will no longer have to be accountable to a broad cross-section of Americans of all backgrounds and races, and be accountable only to the ones that they're comfortable with. And that becomes a lot easier to, I guess, run for re-election that way, and they're happy to do it. Okay, well, you're right.
Well, I just think that it's just in a crass political terms. I think people like me, who may not be informed of the threat to their own lives by this idea, should be made aware of it. And I would suggest that you take a cross swath of people who have lived here for a long time, and their children, and who are doctors and plumbers and electricians and handymen and anything you want, and say what Trump is saying to you is that you're not a citizen of the United States. Your children aren't citizens of the United States.
I mean, it should be a familiar.
And that can remove you from this country. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, certainly early on there was a point. I mean, I guess even during the 2016 election, I mean, it was a theme, although I guess it was probably abstract, since hardly anybody thought that Trump would win the election. And certainly in 2017, 2018, as they took on DACA and their rhetoric about the wall escalated, it was clear that they meant to threaten the citizenship of this broad swath. But I guess now, and I guess to hitch it to your strategic suggestion, not to simply fight this on the basis of it being a stupid revised birtherism targeting Kamala Harris, but that, again, this is the same shot that they were trying to take at you before. But DACA was still too broadly popular, and I guess really still is, or at least the concept behind DACA. You even still find Republicans who are willing to say there needs to be a pathway to citizenship for these, for people born here or brought here as children and just know no other homeland. It doesn't make any sense to deport them, particularly when they're productive citizens. But this is just the same argument, but on steroids. It happens to, pull in a political figure, but it's not necessarily about that political figure. The Republicans could care less whether they swapped out, I guess. Well, I suppose they'd be concerned with it to some extent. But if they swapped out Kamala Harris somehow for some other vice presidential candidate, that's not what they're after. It's just a good vehicle to bring up the issue, and I guess probably to keep their own troops, who might even think that some of that is unfair, focused on Kamala Harris, who they probably hate for political reasons, and so they can go along with the idea that there's something wrong with her citizenship. But I'm just thinking about all the articles I read in 2017 and 2018 that people sneered at and laughed at, rightfully, although we were certainly sympathetic. But reading the stories of Trump supporters who found out, my neighbor, my cousin, my wife is being deported under this stupid, strict new view of citizenship and immigration rights, that I never thought that they would come for the good ones. The old leopard eating, face eating leopards party situation. Yeah. We read dozens of them. And
absolutely, but they would, but I would like the people whose faces are actually being eaten by the leopards
yes.
to know that's what's going to happen, not the neighbor of them. See, this is not being underlined enough, in my view. And I think we're talking about millions of people. Listen, I'll put it in the most blunt, crass political terms.
All right.
That I know of, which is,
okay,
you let Cubans know that they're going to lose their citizenship under these theories. And there'll be a lot less votes for Trump.
That's true. I guess there's your Florida strategy, right? You want to lock up Florida. You go down and say you're all going to be deported back to current-day Cuba starting tomorrow.
Right. You're not a citizen here. You have no right to be here. Go stand in line like everybody else.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's your. If you can figure out a way to put that on TV, I suppose you got it.
It's not. I don't think it's that hard. They're defining the attractive anecdotal stories. Not me. There are people who, are going to be able to tell a good story here. No one's going to care about me, but they'll care about other people, normal people, everyday Americans, so to speak. Who thought they were everyday Americans, but have found out they're not, thanks to Trump.
Yeah, well, he's helping clarify that situation. All right, but it's certainly easy enough to do. I say when you find a way, you literally, can you find the financing to do it? It's a legit attack and a legit ad, and certainly has a huge audience in a key state where you really only have to make it work in one, and that'll probably tip the election.
If you want to make it in Texas, too, I think it could help me there. I'm not that familiar with Texas, but I would think it might have some resonance there. We don't necessarily need it for California, but maybe Arizona. I don't know.
Once the ad is cut, it's cheap enough to change the voiceover.
Right. You don't need a national target here. It just seems to me, and it's something to talk about. And it's actually important, too. I don't want to...
I hope so. We've given it
just
time.
Make this crass. It's obviously important to me on every very personal terms, but it's important for the country that we understand the radical racism here. This is the type of people who, led to the first Civil War. I'm not saying that these guys are going to go to war for this. Maybe they will, but the type of rhetoric is like that. The whole nativism of it to the degree that the plain words and understanding that no one has ever questioned in any way, at least since the Wong Kim Ark case, is now up for grabs. It's funny. There's one little thing that I would tell you that he mentioned that shows you what a racist this guy is in different ways. In his article, Eastman says, not everybody agreed. During the 1920s, there were a lot of Mexicans were brought in to the United States to work, which is true. And then in the 1930s, in the Great Depression, they were all deported back to Mexico, even the ones that were born here.
Yeah.
And he that's his evidence of why he's right, because of the racist policies that were employed at the time, which were never challenged in court because no one ended up suing for whatever reason. I don't know why. Seems to me they could have easily won the case citing Warren Mark, but these are poor agricultural workers, most by and large.
I'm sure they were told.
What did they know what to do in the 30s?
Yeah.
So it's overtly racist, yes. It is a sort of new form of birtherism, but it's different because the question isn't, was she born in the United States, which is what it was with Obama. It's, were her parents born in the United States?
Yeah.
So it's their birtherism. Now we have to show our parents' birth certificates.
Yeah. Right. It's no longer enough. All right. Well, it is pretty amazing. By the way, I have a note here from Monica, who tweets to the both of us here, saying it seems the Biden campaign was worried, apparently, about the challenges to Tammy Duckworth's citizenship, born in Thailand.
That's right.
Tammy Duckworth.
She was more akin to Ted Cruz, yes.
Yeah.
Her father, I believe, is
Yes.
An American citizen,
Mm-hmm.
and her mother is of Thai descent.
Yes.
And she was born
As they say.
in a military base, I think.
Yeah.
Monica would know better than me.
Yeah.
But I believe she was born in a military base outside. But as the law existed at the time of her birth, I believe that there really was no question, as long as you accept the notion that I posited before, that Congress can expand or restrict a constitutional right of being known as a natural-born citizen eligible for the presidency and the vice presidency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I guess they gave that some thought, but less thought to Kamala Harris, and probably rightly so, because it's even more.
Well, it's
far-fetched,
ridiculous. She's
but
born in Oakland. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a tactic. I actually think it's a mistake by Trump anyway, if you want to think of it that way. But I don't think it's something to be shied away from by Democrats. I think the opposite. I think we have an opportunity to go on the offensive.
Yeah.
Using what underlies it all. And again, I wouldn't make it about Harris. This is my own review. I wouldn't make it about Kamala Harris. I would make it about the millions of people whose citizenship has been threatened.
Yeah, well, it seems
by this theory.
Seems consistent with their themed rollout and convention speakers and footage that they'll be showing too. So I mean, they've made their decision to, as they frequently do at these conventions, highlight the stories of rank and file Democratic voters and ordinary citizens, and you can do the same here. So, very interesting though. And I also noticed almost right away that Trump, sometimes he is a scatterbrained, doddering fool, but he also has an act that he puts on that enhances that, and he very frequently will purposefully appear. You never know whether he's just dumb and scatterbrained or whether he's going above and beyond and pretending to be. But he appears to confuse the facts, and so his own initial mention of the issue. I hesitate to even call it an issue. The allegation, I guess, that Eastman makes was to say, well, I heard about this thing, and I heard she's not eligible because she wasn't born in the United States, which is, his own stupid way of saying either he didn't really read the article or I did read the article, I understood it 100%. That's not the argument Eastman is making, but this is the one that works with my base. And I'm going to say that, and then people will call me out as a liar, and I'll say, well, I read a thing that maybe I didn't get the details right. That's something he probably wouldn't even admit to. I mean, how many times has he just sat there, called out on a lie, and just ignores it and tells the same lie again next time? He keeps saying he signed the Veterans Choice Bill, and no one can stop him from doing that. So I guess his plan is to just perhaps go around the country campaigning that Kamala Harris wasn't born in the United States. And we'll
I guess that's a possibility.
Fact-checking it and saying, well, it's pants on fire. It's been debunked, but he keeps saying it.
I mean, that could be where they go. My own reaction, and I think that might be where they end up doing, but my own reaction is He obviously did not read it. Someone told him, ineligible,
anything, sure, yeah.
birther.
Right. And he just figured
and he just reverted to the birtherism he knows about, the Orly Tate's birtherism.
Yeah, I guess.
Which is she wasn't born here.
Right.
Because, let's be honest, even for Trump, if you're born here, you're eligible.
Yeah, I
think, it's not. It really is a difficult argument to not get creamed on if you're saying someone born in the United States of America isn't eligible to be president. It's just, it actually defies the common understanding to such a degree that the embrace of it by Trump is frankly political stupid. Jared Kushner didn't double down, but was equally doubled down on the stupid, but didn't necessarily embrace the argument. He just said, quote, it's out there.
Yeah. I could certainly be his plan. All right. Well, I'm glad you took the time to underline exactly what's wrong with this, not only the background of Eastman's approach to this thing being entirely wrong. Helpful to know, because people sometimes worry about this. I disagree with his conclusion, but he's presented in such scholarly fashion. So it was good to take that apart. And also good
let's be clear
advice.
on that one point. Newsweek's editors are just full of hoo-ha. There is not...
I think we can say that. Hoo-ha.
There is not a single respectable legal scholar who thinks Eastman's argument is even honest, much less legitimate and reasonable. It's nonsense, and he's lied about just about everything about the actual issue. So let's dispense with any theory that this is a reasonable argument.
That reminds me, when you say dispense with, reminds me of Marco Rubio, and reminds me of your strategic point on all of this. Don't bother, don't worry about making it about a personal defense of Kamala Harris. First of all, she can take care of herself. Second of all, no one will remember this about her once she gets to speak. But third of all, it's a more potent issue when you address it in terms of, they're not talking about targeting her, they're talking about targeting you. And don't you hate being targeted? So good point. I think we can run with it.
All politics are local, and you can't get more local than your own house.
That's true. That's our most local jurisdiction. All right, thanks, Armando. We're going to take the last couple minutes to wrap up here. Thanks for stopping in again. Don't get too riled up about it, but don't stop getting riled up. That's good advice for all of you. And I advise you the same thing. One thing I'll sneak in before we depart. Got to make note of this. Greg sent me the tweet of Steve Vladek, who notes with a holy cow, I guess not an actual holy cow, but the expression holy cow, the GAO, what are we calling it these days? It's no longer the General Accounting Office. All right. Well, anyway, the GAO, Government Accounting Office, I think we call it now, has determined that Chad Wolf, you remember him, he's the guy who claims to be acting, right? There was our acting. Yes, acting Secretary of Homeland Security. The GAO says, no, he's not, which is what we have been saying here for some time. Was not lawfully named the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, and neither was Ken Cuccinelli correctly and legally appointed to his position as whatever the hell they've described it as being. Neither of them lawfully appointed even to his proper position, he says, at DHS. This based on a tweet forwarded from Harry Kramer, who I'm not as familiar with, but let's just take a quick look at what he's got here. Acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf and Ken Cuccinelli both are ineligible to be serving in their current roles because they were appointed illegally, the GAO rules, and he's got an attachment here, but a screen grab as well with some highlighting. Upon Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen's resignation on April 10th, 2019, the official who assumed the title of acting secretary had not been designated in the order of succession to serve upon the secretary's resignation. That's the person who served in the interim between Nielsen and Chad Wolf's stepping up to acting, and I can't remember his name offhand, that we've called it before. Because the incorrect official assumed the title of acting secretary at that time, subsequent amendments to the order of succession made by that official, who was invalidly in the position, were themselves invalid, and officials who assumed their positions under such amendments, including Chad Wolf and Ken Cuccinelli, were named by reference to an invalid order of succession. That's a very new and interesting angle on this whole thing. not even referencing the Vacancies Act and the expiration of his term. We have not reviewed the legality of other actions taken by these officials. We're referring the matter to the Inspector General of the DHS for review. And just to take one quick grab down at the bottom, it was Kevin McLennan, right, was the name of the guy who held the job in the interim. As such, the subsequent appointments of Undersecretary for Strategy, Policy, and Plans Chad Wolf and Principal Deputy Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Ken Cuccinelli were also improper because they relied on an amended designation made by Mr.
From
McLennan.
Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So, all very interesting. A totally different angle on it, although it was related. The idea that Ken McLennan improperly assumed office, and therefore everything that he put forward was improper, and one of the things he put in place was the policy by which Wolf and Cuccinelli moved into the line of succession. Amazing. We'll be back next week.